On tonight's episode of The Young and the Corporate, we meet our main character, Sumner Redstone, as he fights for his life.
We're live on the scene for WBX Eyewitness News, where a fire has engulfed the Copley Square Hotel. Early reports indicate that a disgruntled former busboy may have lit the match.
There's someone up there on the third floor. They're hanging out the window. Hold on, I'm coming for you. We're right behind you. You can let go. Wait, she's still in there. Who? Delsa. Delsa, you gotta go back in there and get her. We'll try, sir.
Mr. Redstone, glad to see you're awake. You've suffered severe burns over 45% of your body. But you're at one of the best trauma centers in Boston, and we expect you to make a full recovery. If you're up for it, your wife Delsa's in the waiting room.
My wife is Phyllis.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir. They must have written down the wrong name. Who's Delsa?
She was with me at the Copley. She's my,
Say no more. I will check to see if she ended up at this hospital. I'll let Phyllis in.
Oh, Sumner, I'm so glad you're okay. You could have died. I was so worried about you. Why were you at a business meeting at the Copley so late? I told you, nothing good happens after midnight.
I'll be okay, Phyllis. I'll be okay. In fact, I feel stronger than ever.
Sumner Redstone would recover physically, but his psyche would be forever altered. If he were a normal person, a near-death experience may have humbled him. Perhaps it would have put an end to his infidelity, or he would have reconnected with his father and brother, from whom he was estranged after a years-long legal battle over the family business. But no, like the daytime soap opera villain, Sumner Redstone wasn't wired for introspection. Instead, the Copley fire taught him something else. He was invincible. And 4 decades later, when he was chairman of Paramount, he would tell his shareholders that he was also immortal. Yes, despite his sagging features, his hunched stature, and unsteady stride, 86-year-old Redstone would tell you that, in fact, he was still a total horn dog.
I have the vital statistics of a 20-year-old.
He'd say, slurring his words as his slack jaw betrayed him. Whatever vitality remained certainly seemed to be enough for his 2 live-in girlfriends.
He doesn't have a wrinkle on his face.
One girlfriend named Sydney Holland told a Vanity Fair reporter, Holland would eventually audition for The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, so maybe she was taking her cues from Erica Jane. Either way, she kept up the facade. Pay no mind to the oxygen tank in the corner or the adult diapers stacking up against the wall. This man was as sharp as ever, she insisted. And when he was 91 years old, Sumner Redstone was the chairman of not 1, but 2 publicly traded companies, pulling in $13.2 million a year for his services, which in 2014 amounted to dialing into the annual shareholder meeting and breathing faintly into the phone. Helping Holland maintain the Weekend at Bernie's scheme was a small mob of hangers-on, including girlfriends, company executives, and members of both boards of directors. So why keep up the ruse? Well, as long as the immortal Sumner Redstone maintained control of the empire, they could use it as their personal piggy bank. And who's gonna stop them? Certainly not Sumner himself, who at this point was not much more than a corpse with a boner. This is the Corporate Gossip Podcast, Paramount and Viacom, Sumner House of Horrors.
Hey, this is producer Mike. If you want to binge all of season 4 right now and not have to wait for weekly drops, head over to our brand new Patreon, patreon.com/corporate gossip. All audio and video are up there right now for the entire season. Plus, not only can you binge the entire season, there'll be discussions with Adam and Becca about each episode. So head over to patreon.com/corporate gossip and sign up now. All right, let's get into the show.
Let's do the show. Speed.
Welcome back to another episode of the Corporate Gossip Podcast. I'm your host, CPA Scorned, Becca Platsky. I'm here with my brother and my co-host,
Data analytics playboy, Adam Platsky.
Today, we are talking about the Sumner Redstone family and Paramount/Viacom. You'll see these companies are very intertwined. And a lot of our research today comes from the book Unscripted by James B. Stewart and Rachel Abrams. They both work worked at the New York Times, and they came together and wrote this book. The first part of this book is about Sumner Redstone and Paramount. The second part, which is going to be the second part of this 2-part episode, is about Les Moonves and CBS. And you'll see as we go through these 3 companies, Paramount, Viacom, CBS, they're like disgusting brothers.
Good callback.
So supposedly this was part of the inspiration for Succession, the HBO show. I'm not convinced. I think Succession is pretty Murdoch coded, but there's certainly elements, boardroom tussles, family drama, a father withholding his love from his child. Never seen that before. Mm-hmm. So you ready to dive in?
Let's jump in.
All right. The first piece of corporate gossip. We've never seen this before. A traumatized son inherits the family business and uses his new power and money to inflict pain on others to fill the hole left by an abusive father. By the way, if you're taking notes, this is the same opening line we'll use in the WWE episode that we did this season. So we see this a lot. If you're seeing some trends here, you're not the only one. So you ready to dive into Sumner Redstone? So Sumner Redstone was born on May 27th, 1923 in Boston, Mass. He likes to say he grew up poor in a tenement, but it's hard to say for sure. He grew up in a public housing project, but that's like pretty common in the 20s. But this is either way another example of a CEO benefiting from socialism before completely admonishing it. He says, our apartment had no toilet. We had to walk down the corridor to use a water closet we shared with the neighbors. That was all I knew, and I never felt less privileged than anyone else. So Sumner's mom was Bella Ostrovsky.
Ostrovsky.
What did I say?
Ostrovsky or Ostrovsky. It's Ostrovsky. There's no R. Or.
Okay, got it. Thanks. She had immigrated from a shtetl in what's now Ukraine, and Sumner's dad, whose name was Mickey, was a serial entrepreneur. I'm not sure where he actually came from, but he owned nightclubs, he owned liquor wholesale businesses, drive-in movie theaters, and interestingly, Sumner Redstone, did you know this, is not his birth name. In 1940, Sumner asked his dad if they could change the family name from Rothstein to Redstone, which is the translation from the Yiddish Rothstein. And when Sumner is 12, his dad's business has become pretty successful, and they're able to move to a nicer neighborhood. And at this point, Sumner's dad, Mickey, really starts pushing his kids. He starts to create this rivalry between Sumner and his brother, Edward. Again, very thematic for what we see on this podcast. Edward Redstone, who is not heard much of, again, I couldn't find many articles about him at all, but he describes their family life as a difficult one. He remembers their parents' marriage as unhappy and tense. He described their mom as a crazy tyrant who favored Sumner over him, and their father was mean and tough. But eventually Sumner gets into Harvard, he graduates, and he gets a job in a corporate law firm where he rises through the ranks so quickly. In 1951, at 28 years old, he becomes a law partner at the firm Ford, Bergson, Adams, Borkland, and Redstone. It's crazy. I guess, how do you become a partner at 28? Is everybody just, you know what it is? I just realized this. Everybody's probably at war.
Everybody's
1951.
At war. Everybody dies early.
Yeah. So I guess you can become partner at 28 years old and get your name on the building.
Yeah, they don't make like an age inflation rating for people born in 1927.
So during this time, he learns the ins and outs of corporate mergers and acquisitions, and he'll use that a lot later in life. And you found something about his military service that I didn't find.
Yeah, so I saw that he was in the military. So actually, while attending Harvard, he left to enter military service. In his primary school, he had an interest in languages, and specifically Japanese. So he had this great dialect in Japanese, which was super important during World War II. So he would eventually work in the Signal Intelligence Service, decoding Japanese messages during World War II. Based on what I read, he left Harvard to join the service. So based on what you know at this time, don't you think that's a pretty selfless act of Sumner?
What do you mean, to join the military?
Yeah, to join the military.
I mean, I guess, but it's hard to tell because it was
But he wasn't
compulsory.
like a selfish asshole at this point. He was...
No, but I think that was pretty standard to join the military in 1942.
When you're at Harvard?
I don't know. I think that's it's hard for me to tell. I really can't. I don't want to put any moral judgments on that. I think it's great that he did that. That's really interesting. I didn't know that. And I can't imagine that must have been a very unique experience. Around this time, after he becomes partner at the law firm, he gets married to Phyllis Gloria Raphael, and they have 2 kids. They have Brent in 1951 and Sherry in 1954. And he decides, you know what? I'm over the law thing, and I'm going back and I'm joining my dad's company in 1954 at 31 years old. By the way, this is this is Ted Turner. It's the same story.
It sounds like the opening to everything. His dad didn't respect him, and he gave him a lot of money, and his dad beat him. Anyway, that's the end of the episode.
Yeah,
that
seriously.
should be opening, middle, and closing of every corporate gossip.
Our Jack Welsh episode was titled Daddy Issues, but it's very applicable to many of these men.
If you wanted to raise a kid who would eventually own a company, you should listen to this podcast and raise your kid that way.
Yeah. If you don't care about ethics, if you only care about a relentless desire for money and power, listen to this podcast.
Well, it's really an investment in your own future.
It's true.
So that you can mooch off your kid.
It's true. This is a 20-point plan to get your kid to be a rich asshole.
A rich asshole.
So Sumner joins his dad's company in 1954. He's 31 years old. He's making $5,000 a year, $56,000 today. According to one article I read, by the way, he left a pretty lucrative job. He was making $100,000 a year in the early 1950s at his law partnership job. That's $1 million a year salary today. So that provided a nice cushion, I'm sure, a couple of years saving and then going to work for your dad for $5,000 a year. But in 1967, he ends up becoming CEO of the company that would be renamed National Amusements. Remember that name for this episode and the next one, at age 43. And at the time, his brother Ed, his father Mickey, and him, they each owned 33.33% of the company. And wouldn't you know it, sibling rivalries under a tyrannical father don't just magically disappear, especially if you don't go to therapy. So a few years later, Ed, Sumner's brother, ends up quitting the company and suing Sumner for undercutting his role, along with mismanagement and wrongdoing. He settles with his older brother for $5 million in 1972, which is $31 million today. Sumner takes his brother's portion of the business, and he's ready to take more. At this point, Ed has 2 kids. Michael and Ruth Ann, and Sumner has 2 kids, Sherry and Brent. Each of these 4 kids have stakes in National Amusement, but Ed's kids were kind of troubled, and it seemed like Sumner took advantage of that and bought their shares to increase his ownership percentage in National Amusements. I gotta love the business boys taking part in the Koch family pastime of suing the shit out of each other. But here's the story, and I couldn't find much, but what I did read was that Ed's son, Michael, so this is Sumner's nephew, was in and out of hospitals for various mental illnesses throughout his life. And Ed's daughter, Ruth Ann, dropped out of Brandeis, joined a cult, and was never heard from again until she was found dead in Japan in the same year that both of Ed's parents and his wife, Layla, died. So Ruth Ann has a son, Adam, who Ed and his second wife raised until he died in a motorcycle accident after a long battle with drug addiction in 2004. So an incredibly tragic set of circumstances for Sumner's older brother. Ed Redstone ends up going on to found a newspaper and a bank in Martha's Vineyard, and he dies of a heart attack at either 81 or 83. I couldn't tell. I couldn't find anything about Ed and Sumner's relationship in their adult years, but you have to wonder how it feels to watch your brother go through so much hardship while you have such a tumultuous relationship with that side of the family. Michael Redstone, one of Ed's kids, along with some of the trustees set up by Sumner and Ed's father, sued Sumner in 2007, alleging that he snatched control of National Amusements by secretly engineering a purchase of shares from the family trust at lowball prices. But ultimately, the suit was thrown out because it had been too long. But I can imagine a scenario in which your brother's going through a lot and you're like, well, shit, this is a great opportunity for me to lowball them because they really need the money.
Is that you can imagine a situation like that?
Why can you not?
That's pretty.
I mean, based on what we're going to find out
predatory.
from Sumner Redstone, it is predatory, but it's not like out of the realm of possibility.
No, I hear you. I hear you. Yeah.
You have the facts. Like, they're going through a very difficult time.
Based on what I've learned doing research for this podcast, it's not surprising.
Yeah. We don't know that that's what happened, but the facts feel like that's what happened, especially because they sued based on that basis.
There's such wild stuff that goes on in this story that you blew over the fact that after so much tragedy, I'm just going to go retire and open up a newspaper and a bank.
Yeah.
Like, that's some serious rich people stuff to be like, well, I'm in my depression era. Time to start a bank.
I will
just
say
such a wealth thing to do.
Banks aren't easy to
I know, and I will
bank charter
say,
it's difficult to come by.
based on the obituaries that I read, it seemed like Ed Redstone had a pretty good relationship with the people of Martha's Vineyard. Like, he seemed pretty loved. So that's it's hard to tell from an obituary. Okay, so back to 1972, Sumner's got controlling interest in national amusements, and he's ready to shake things up. Here he is with Julie Andrews when she received the Star of the Year award. Redstone's 42 there. He has such a baby face. It's crazy. So he starts growing the company like crazy, and he does this by modernizing the movie-going experience. As a movie lover, if you go to the theater a lot, you're going to appreciate this next part. He makes some pretty significant innovations, basically creating the modern movie theater. This is from one of Sumner's biographies. Redstone's theaters were a single building holding multiple viewing spaces and a centralized concession area surrounded by a large parking lot. He emphasized comfort in theater seats. Loudspeaker systems, which had changed little since the 1920s, were replaced by state-of-the-art stereophonic systems. Redstone coined the term multiplex to describe this new type of movie theater. So now, these movie theaters obviously were a hit. At the same time, he realizes, I'm paying a lot of money to the people who are making the movies. Maybe I should make movies. He buys stakes in 20th Century Fox, Columbia Pictures, and Paramount Pictures, all which generated pretty good returns and put him on the road to becoming a multi-millionaire. Okay. Corporate gossip number 2 is Sumner Redstone is just trying to have a nice night in a hotel with his mistress when the building is engulfed by flames and he has to cling to the side of the building for his life. Like Jack Welch before him, according to Sumner, this near-death experience did not change him one bit.
Can't stop, won't stop.
So this picture is of the 1979 Copley Square Hotel fire. You described this picture.
Yeah, it looks like a movie scene.
It does.
Doesn't it? It looks like there's so much
probably
motion.
I thought they were
14
filming.
ladders.
I thought they were filming a fire.
Yeah.
Look at all the different fires that are like.
This is a huge hotel fire. I mean, there's probably 14 ladders that are attempting to rescue people out of this, 8-story hotel. So it's 1979 and Sumner is a rising star in the entertainment business, engaging in some, as they are wont to do, extracurricular activities at the Boston Copley Plaza Hotel.
Pine car derby?
Yes.
Pine car.
Sexy pine car derby. And that's when calamity strikes. In his memoir, I love this name, A Passion to Win, he describes smelling smoke and opening the window to try to get out. And then the room is engulfed in flames. So he has to hang onto the windowsill for his life as the fire inside is searing his hand. So he's outside, he's hanging on to the window. There's fire that's burning his hand. Even still to this day, his hand is still
damaged.
He actually has to strap, when he's playing tennis, he has to strap the tennis racket to his arm because he can't hold on to it. So he has, a lifelong ailment that he's dealing with. So, and he couldn't jump, by the way, because he was up too high. So here's a quote. "The pain was excruciating, but I refused to let go. That way was death. I began counting 1 to 10, 1 to 10, hoping that a fire engine would come save me." Here's the woman, by the way, that he was in the hotel with. They are still friends to this day.
Near-death experience like that.
I guess,
Pulls
yeah.
you close.
Yeah. He was rescued. Like I mentioned, he suffered severe burns over 45% of his body and had to have 5 operations. 2 people died in the fire. He ended up suing the hotel for negligence and then donated the proceeds to the Mass General Burn Center, which now has his name on it. The woman he escaped the fire with, Delsa Weiner, she had minor injuries. And here's a quote from him reflecting on the experience.
"There's been a lot of mythology about that fire," he said. "People talk a lot about how it changed my life, changed my values. That is not true. My values are largely the same. But what's interesting is that the most exciting things in my life have ever happened after the fire."
Sorry, kids. God, I'm shocked that I didn't see any Jack Welch in this story because they are really similar. But what's pretty insane, considering that he was just in a massive legal fight with his family, is that you would think that maybe he's like, life's too short. Maybe I should reconnect with my brother. Maybe I shouldn't be cheating on my wife.
He's like, nah, perhaps I should light them on fire.
Seriously. I think the question you have here, and I'll read it, this is what you wrote, like, something in Sumner changes. And I did watch a couple interviews where he was basically like, I escaped death, and therefore I can do anything. So I think there's often two paths that people take after they go through something like that. It's either like, let me reassess, or like, I'm king of the world.
Well, I'm reading about an executive now who goes through a similarly traumatic experience, and I think I've read about another executive who has a similar experience. So 2 or 3 executives I've read about now, they just throw themselves back into their work.
Yeah.
And it's just a complete distraction. It's like, well, if I don't do this, then I actually have to think about this. It's almost like an alcoholic who doesn't want to think about their trauma.
I think people can treat work almost like they would treat an addictive substance like alcohol or drugs. I think it can be, especially when you're very powerful at your work, I think it can be incredibly intoxicating. I think that if they did, this is total conjecture, but based on what I know from doing this podcast, I bet you if you did a brain scan of people who were buzzed or getting, chasing that next drink, it would look a lot similar to a CEO who's chasing that next, getting more power, whether it's merging a company or whether it's a company all hands. It's like, I do think a lot of these guys are addicted to how they feel when they're running these companies and the control they feel.
And think about the butterfly effect of some guy in a hotel falling asleep with a lit cigarette, and now look at him. He's being it's being talked about here on a podcast.
Is that how the fire started?
No, I'm just saying.
Yeah, isn't
some
that
little
crazy?
thing that started a fire, a spark in the boiler.
That's how fire
changed
started back
entertainment
then.
history.
That's true.
There was, every room was a smoking room.
Yeah, that's true. You could just
It's the
dampen
only
your
reason for a
cigarette.
fire. Like the fire marshal didn't even need to go in. He was just like, yep, 1979, yep, lit cigarette.
Fire marshal just flicked his cigarette out, and he was like, what's that probably? Right before he went in to tell you what it was, he did the thing that caused it.
You think firemen at that time went into the burning buildings with cigarettes in their mouths?
Oh, for sure. They didn't even light them.
need to acclimate to the fire.
Just lit it on Sumner Redstone's index finger.
Are you ready to dive into corporate gossip number 3? Mm-hmm. Number 3 is Sumner Redstone channels the business genius Paris Hilton, and he says, "We're going shopping, babes." Do you like?
Yeah, is this picture generative AI? This is wonderful.
Yeah, this is great. Midjourney really does wonders.
So what you're seeing on the screen, if you're not watching us on YouTube, is a shot from The Simple Life, probably some promotion shot where Paris and Nicole are indulging in a shopping spree. But I put Sumner's face over Nicole's body, and then all of the companies he bought: Viacom, Paramount, CBS, Blockbuster, and then what they were saying when they were doing that. Shopping is my cardio. So that's what you get when you listen to corporate gossip. Anyway, we're skipping ahead about a decade. The late 80s, early 90s, when Sumner goes back to business boy basics. I want more companies, and I want them now. Synergies be damned. I just want to be the biggest boss boy in town. I will say, a lot of people say that Sumner Redstone is the inspiration for Logan Roy, and it's obviously an amalgamation of many different companies, but this part of the story, in my opinion, is more Kendall Roy coded than anything. So Sumner goes on a buying spree. He takes over Viacom, and Viacom owned MTV, Showtime, Nickelodeon for $3.4 billion, then Paramount. This was a super dramatic purchase because it took months to lock down. He said, here's a quote, "This is finally it," Redstone said Wednesday morning after emerging from a round-the-clock session. "I feel like I've been in a war zone." Now, I know Sumner is an actual veteran, unlike most of the CEOs that we see, but this is my impression of him. comparing that to a war zone. Listen, boys, I know you just completed Operation Desert Shield or whatever, but have you ever been in a boardroom for several days? We ran out of clear Pepsi, our Sizzler orders arrived cold, and not to mention there was no eye candy. And I'm just looking at old men. The only accent I have is Bernie Sanders. Okay, so here he is after the deal. Oh my, have you ever seen a happier man in your life?
Yeah, why are his cheekbones so high?
He has incredibly high cheekbones this is the 80s. There's no way that was filler. That's all natural. He's got he's got the cheekbones of a New York City influencer. Yeah. You're going to hear a lot of war metaphors from Sumner in this part of the episode and Les Moonves in the second part of the episode. And at what point does human dingleberry evoking a war of attrition to describe buyout negotiations become stolen valor is my question. Mm-hmm. So a few years later, he buys Paramount Communications for $10 billion and then Blockbuster Entertainment for another $8 billion. And a lot of people say he way overpaid. This is the Kendall Roy part. But Sumner had his reasons to pay a premium. Some would say being very frivolous with shareholder money. It wasn't that he had a winning strategy to ensure a return. No. It was that he wanted to beat his rivals, including billionaire John Malone, who we met in the David Zaslav episode, and Barry Diller, who was the head of QVC. Here's a quote. He says, "Look, I just want to win. I don't care what we bid. I just want to win. I just want to beat Barry." Like, it's so fucking immature. Ugh. This is an iconic picture. You're going to see so many celebrities in this episode and next. This is Rosie O'Donnell covered in slime in her classic backwards Kangol hat and collared shirt next to Will Smith, who's wearing, for some reason, an all-white tracksuit next to Rosie O'Donnell, who's covered in slime, and then Sumner and his wife, Sherry. This is the 1997 Kids' Choice Awards.
Who's that behind them? Shane McMahon?
No, it doesn't say. Him. Doesn't say. Can you imagine? He buys all these companies. He overpaid for all these companies, and then he immediately has to cut costs because he needs to make up all that extra money that he paid for them. Imagine being a creative person working for these companies and you get laid off because corporate daddy overpaid for your company to settle a dick measuring contest. And I know what you're thinking. Shouldn't the board of directors have stepped in here? And you'll understand later in this episode just how asleep at the wheel they were. And they would continue to be up until very recently. But the last big purchase Sumner makes is in Y2K when he buys CBS for $40 billion. A few years later, he splits off Viacom and CBS as two separately publicly traded companies. Viacom would be run by Felipe Dauman, and CBS is run by Les Moonves. But Redstone, this is key, he controls both companies. He has 80% of the voting shares through National Amusements. That's important to note. It's my favorite part of the podcast where I get to thank all the people who supported us via Buy Me Coffee. If you don't want to commit to the Patreon and you still want to support the pod, you can do so by going to buymeacoffee.com/corporategossippod. And you get a shout out, which I'm going to do right now. If you don't hear your name, don't worry, we'll get to it this season. Sal, Iogan, Zachary Reynolds, Lena Marie, Rebecca Gonzalez, Carrie S., Emma, at Clay It Forward, Huge W, at Marad Zaid, Philip Barnett, Vicky Wong, at WTO Swicky, Kathy Musty, Laura Jackson, Patrick J, Robin E, Joaquin Bridges, Susan DJS1, Colleen, Hannah, Anthony, at What's Jack Making. Go follow him on Instagram, by the way. Everything he cooks looks so amazing. Timbo Slice, Brian Chu, Lauren, Rodolfo C, Tom, friend of the pod, Miles Brady, RJ Partner, Alex F, Vivian, Emily H, Steve Branham, Lana Bear. Thank you guys so much for your support. We really couldn't do this without you. This is a labor, but it's a labor of love, and your guys' support really makes it worth it. Every dollar that you guys send to the podcast goes right into the production. We pay for all of the subscriptions to do all of our research and book. There's a lot of people that actually work behind the scenes, and so we get to pay them. And it does put a dent in Mike's Topo Chico addiction. So thank you again from the bottom of our hearts. Corporate gossip number 4 is, hello, fellow youths.
We have so much in common, including our interest for 20-year-old women and the fact that we won't die for many, many, many years.
Okay, so at this part of the story, I have to tell you that Sumner has a chronic fixation with never dying. And like a lot of people don't like to think about their own demise. That's fine. I'm not going to judge anybody for that. But from a business standpoint, it's really important that you face your own mortality, even at a surface level, because of succession planning. If you are the 80% controlling shareholder of several companies and you look like that, you need to be thinking about training and supporting somebody who will take your place inevitably. But when asked about succession planning, this is in 2009, when he's 86, 87, he says to Larry King, and Mike will read this.
I'm a curious case of Mr. Redstone. I have no intention of ever retiring or of dying. I have the vital statistics of a 20-year-old. Even I can't say that without laughing. Even 20-year-old men get older, not me. My doctor says I'm the only man who's reversed it. I eat and drink every antioxidant known to man. I exercise 50 minutes every day.
And Sumner says, oh, you don't believe me? You don't think I'm cool as a 20-year-old? I'll prove it. So what you're seeing is an 86-year-old Sumner Redstone at the 2009 MTV Movie Awards, flanked by his 24-year-old grandson, Brandon Korf, in a newsboy hat and a denim shirt. And Brandon's girlfriend, a really pretty brunette dressed for the times in a fedora over her long brown hair, a statement feather necklace, and a chunky boho bag. She looks like Janelle from Teen Mom. The girlfriend is unidentified, but according to the book Unscripted, throughout the award show, Sumner brazenly flirted with Brandon's date, often putting his arm around her, a spectacle witnessed by senior Viacom executives sitting nearby. Sumner acted more like Brandon's little twerp brother than his grandfather. Another quote, Sumner was relentless in his insistence that Brandon socialize with him and introduce him to potential romantic companions, calling him up at 3 or 4 in the morning.
You got any friends my age?
Hey, Brandon, what's the deal with that Lauren Conrad girl from Laguna Beach?
Oh my God, that would have been his Laguna Beach would have been his asset at the time.
Yeah, no. I already had the thought last night. I was thinking, what if Stephen Coletti was actually Sumner Redstone as a shapeshifter?
Like he drank the blood and he was like, I'll never wear combat boots on the beach.
Kristen, I heard your car is donezo.
But he still has the voice of an old man.
What do you think he was calling him at 3 o'clock in the morning for?
Can you please come over and help me set up my thefacebook.com account?
Grandpa, this is a photo of you from 40 years ago next to Julie Andrews. Can you imagine waking up in the middle of the night in your LA Bachelor pad to your grandfather arranging a booty call? Adam, you added this. This is Creed from The Office with his hair dyed. This is a great analogy. Here's the thing. Let's get back to business. It's not just weird and creepy that Sumner thinks he's Benjamin Button.
But it is very weird and very creepy.
It is weird and creepy. By the way, he actually called himself Benjamin Button.
Oh, yeah. He told that about his doctors.
There are business implications, particularly, like I said, when it comes to succession planning. Because when you are the chairman of a company that looks like this, you'd want to start thinking about training somebody to take over as CEO when you expire.
He doesn't look like the CEO of a company, let alone an alive person.
No.
He looks like if somebody wheeled out a body at a funeral home, I'd be like, I'm upset. I need to talk to the makeup artist because they screwed up hard.
That's what I was thinking. I was like, I've seen dead people who look more alive than this guy.
It's crazy.
It's pretty cool. She's standing right next to Chelsea from Love is Blind.
So here's the thing. The picture that you're looking at is 5 years after the picture that I just showed you. And Adam and Mike are not overreacting when they say this man looks dead. And it doesn't help that he's standing next to Megan Fox.
Yeah, really.
So his business associates are asking him around this time, like, hey, Sumner, here after I scoop you a little more applesauce. Listen, buddy, you got your daughter, Sherry. You know, she's really involved in the business. And the trust that you already have set up with your first wife stipulates that Sherry is going to take over the business upon your demise. Are you going to pass the reins to her? And here's how he responds. He goes, I will not discuss succession. You know why? I'm not going to die. He said that the same year he looked like this. From a psychological standpoint, we see this all the time. We saw it with the Subway CEO and founder Fred DeLuca, who died without a succession plan. We saw it with we saw it with GE CEO Jack Welch, who really struggled to appoint somebody to take over. These CEOs cannot psychologically separate themselves from these companies, which is like, fine, talk that over with your therapist. But it is your fiduciary duty to the shareholders who invest in your company, not to mention the employees that labor there, for the board and the CEO to do proper succession planning. As an investor, if you see a CEO who is hesitant to succession plan, that's a red flag. And you'll see how this ends up playing out at Viacom.
Where's the street here? Where's Jim Cramer? Where are all my friends? Where are my squawk friends?
Seriously.
Why aren't they questioning? And I started to look into this. And I found an article from the Hollywood Reporter, Why Sumner Redstone's Health Hasn't Concerned Wall Street. And you'll get into some of the conversations that executives are saying about Sumner. Sources say that Redstone's mind remains sharp, but that he's dealing with mobility issues in line with his age. Don't worry, guys. This is me. Don't worry, guys. We're letting his body rot from the outside in, but his mind's the real prize, and that doesn't age. Professor Jay Lorsch, a governance expert at Harvard Business School, said, if a chairman misses an annual meeting, it is not likely to spook shareholders. If he is not well, there's nothing you can do, he said. Governance experts, in fact, say that death is the most likely reason for a change of chairman at a company controlled by the founder when the founder does not step down.
I just want to make it clear. When this man looks like this, he is still technically, I mean, I don't even want to say technically, he is the chairman of the board of two publicly traded companies for which he is receiving a full salary of multiple $1 million a year. And there are reports that in those years that he's the chairman of the board, when he calls into these shareholder meetings, he basically is laying on his bed. They're putting the phone next to him and he's basically just breathing into the microphone and not saying a word. They don't even know if he can comprehend it. We'll get into it a little bit more later.
Yeah, totally. There's some jobs you can do this old, like being president of the United States. But being chairman of Paramount, that's unacceptable.
Yeah, you're not wrong. No, absolutely. I mean, it's crazy. And it's the craziest thing to me, and I'm going to talk about this more, but like, who are the people advocating for this old man? Like, who are the people who can say, take a rest, like enjoy the last 6 months of your life in peace? It's
Rob
crazy.
Dyrdek.
Rob Dyrdek. Okay, so let's get deep. Let's get dark, shall we? Might as well. Corporate gossip number 5 is, we've reached the point of the episode where we talk about Sumner Redstone's crimes against women. That Sumner has abused women. Obvious trigger warning ahead. But I need you to know up front that Sumner was never accused or charged with any crime. We know at this point that does not exonerate him of anything. If anything, it's an indictment of the system that covered it up, and in some cases, laughed off his behavior. And I also want you to keep this system in mind when we get to the next episode, where we're going to talk about his good friend and colleague and protege, Les Moonves. So Sumner was married 2 times, first to Phyllis Raphael in 1947 to 1999, and then to Paula Fortunato from 2002 to 2009. He was not a model husband to either woman, particularly when it came to fidelity. But the victims, at least that's been reported, of his most egregious behavior were the girlfriends he had on the side. These stories come from an incredible Vanity Fair article, and Vanity Fair did so much great reporting on Sumner Redstone. This comes from Sumner Redstone in Love, the cringy sexcapades of a horny billionaire, by the reporters who also wrote Unscripted.
There should have been like a subtext called "Ew."
Ooh. Yikes. So let's start with Malia Andelin, who met Sumner in 2008 when she was 26 and he was 86. She was a flight attendant on a private jet that Sumner was on. And the first time they ever met, he blatantly sexually harassed her on the plane in front of another CBS board member. He's going to come up a lot more in this episode and in the next one, Arnold Kopelson, who was a producer before he became a CBS board member. And his wife was there too, Ann Kopelson. Here's a dramatic reading of the interaction.
I hear women love to be spanked.
Sumner told her at one point.
Do you like to be spanked?
Anne allegedly tried to stop Sumner, but he persisted.
Oh, please don't sue me for sexual harassment.
Sumner told Andelin and then laughed. Sumner pelted Andelin with inappropriate comments for the rest of the flight, and she grew increasingly upset. He asked repeatedly for her address and phone number, and she refused. And when they landed, he became obsessed with her. He called her constantly. He showed up at her house. And the worst part was that she stopped getting work with the private jet company, presumably because she had brushed off Sumner's advances. Here's one voice message that he left on her phone.
Some say I create a mission impossible, and some say that this mission is impossible. But I made this mission possible. And I know that you were risk averse and you wouldn't talk to me on the plane, but I know that if you called me back and you were a risk taker, that this call could perhaps change your life.
He called her and called her until one day she said, fine, I'll see you. She shows up at his house and she sees his housekeeper. Housekeeper greets her at the door and he tries to reassure her. He says, there's nothing to be afraid of. I'm here. You're not alone. You're going to be okay. He just wants to give you the world. But this is a quote from the book. While Sumner was showing her his fish tank, she felt sick and thought she might faint. Various thoughts crossed her mind. Her first reaction was that she never wanted to see him again. But as she wrote in her journal at the time, Sumner had so much money and so much power, he'd crush her. And she felt like she didn't have a choice. And so eventually she becomes a fixture at Sumner's house. She's tolerating his constant phone calls, his multiple. Malia didn't reciprocate those feelings. And even though he was hypersexual towards her, she didn't really believe he could actually perform. She thought instead that he just wanted to show off in front of his buddies that he could sleep with attractive girls if he wanted to. That was her take. But here's the rub. Sumner was giving a lot of money to these women. You could say that the women saw it as an equal trade, wiping the spittle off the corner of an old man's mouth as he tries in vain to grab your blouse might be easier when he buys you a $2.5 million house. Or you could say that these women were financially manipulated. But here's the article. It says, over the years, Sumner amended his trust more than 40 times to add and remove numerous beneficiaries, many of them the women he dated. Felipe Dauman, who is the president of Viacom, he was co-trustee of Sumner's trust, was aware of many of the gifts and acknowledged that several women received over $20 million each. A lot of women received $10 million and many, many women received over $1 million.
So just the going rate.
Yeah. And at this point, if you're listening to this podcast and you're the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, maybe you're saying, Becca, this just sounds like a rich, horny old man dabbling in light, alleged sex trafficking. Me and my friends do this all the time. As long as I keep one eye on the share price and my other eye on this 25-year-old's yabos, who cares what I do? The thing you have to know is he's not just giving them cash out of his own wallet. He's giving them Viacom and CBS stock that he owned, but also this is giving these women voting power in the company. And two of them in particular, Manuela Herzer and Sydney Holland, who we'll meet later on, would end up receiving so much stock that they threatened Sumner's control of his own company. I just want to make this very clear. Around this time, Viacom and CBS shareholders are investing money in a company being run by a geriatric playboy who in turn is transferring those shares to his girlfriends. This created a risk that these girlfriends, who are not business people, let alone someone who could run a media conglomerate, although Sumner is also not somebody who could run a media conglomerate, but that they would take control of it. And the only people who are aware of this risk and had the ability to stop it are the Viacom CBS board of directors and senior executives who either were asleep at the wheel or were complicit. In fact, they're going to freaking bat for this guy. And from a 2015 Vanity Fair article, a year after this photo was taken, it says Viacom executives want to make clear that while Sumner Redstone may have lost a step here and there physically, his mind is as keen as ever. He's as sharp as a tack. But others who were interviewed in the same article paint a different picture. This is what is actually going on behind the scenes. One person says Sumner, A, cannot speak, and B, hasn't had a meal since Labor Day other than tubes. I think there's a big charade going on that Sumner's doing fine. In this person's telling, Redstone cannot move on his own and spends all day seated in a chair watching sports on television. He is said to grunt rather than speak coherently. Quote, I think he's pretty out of it, this person continues. He can't speak. I don't know how much he knows what's going on. Worse, the idea that Redstone is sharp as a tack, as Julie suggests, is not true, this person claims. He's not. He's really not. It's a sham. It really is. It's horrible. So why would the executives and the board of directors prop up this invalid? One theory is they had such a good thing going, weekend at Bernieing the melting chairman of the board. By the mid-2010s, Sumner is barely coherent. He dials into the quarterly earning calls and he says nothing. In 2014, he's watching reruns of winning Red Sox baseball games that he doesn't know are reruns and collecting $13.2 million as the chairman of two companies. This man. Let's just go straight into corporate gossip 6. So Sumner Redstone is like, watch this. Person, woman, man, camera, TV. Give me my $13 million. Thank you. So now it's 2015 and Sumner Redstone's mental acuity is under increased scrutiny. He hasn't been seen in public in a year. The last time he was seen, at least according to Getty Images, is this picture. He hasn't shown up to any board meetings. He's still collecting checks. Shareholders could turn the other cheek in 2014 when the stock price was in the $80 range, but now it's slipping. By summer 2015, we're sitting at $43 a share. And Bloomberg publishes a great analysis in 2015 called Viacom is having a midlife crisis that kind of explains where Viacom is at. This season, ratings have declined by double digits at Viacom's most popular cable networks, Comedy Central, BET, VH1, Nickelodeon, Spike, TV Land. At MTV, primetime ratings are down 25% in the 18 to 34-year-old demo. To put you in the right frame of mind, if you turned on MTV at that time, you'd see Catfish, Teen Mom OG, Rob Dyrdek's Fantasy Factory.
Dear
Are You the One?
Dear Drac.
Sorry.
Dear Deck.
Dear Deck.
Are You the One? Teen Wolf. Are You the One is amazing, by the way. It was part of our pandemic MTV The Challenge binge. But anyway, around that time, the cable networks were struggling to retain viewers, being lured to new streaming services like Netflix and Hulu. But Viacom was particularly bad. And to make matters worse, at the beginning of 2015, Jon Stewart of Comedy Central's The Daily Show announced he was packing it up, although he recently returned. But if you ask Viacom's execs like CEO Felipe Dauman, who had been CEO since 2006, and was at the time the third highest paid CEO in 2015, raking in $44 million behind only David Zaslav of Discovery and Les Moonves of CBS. And by the way, that salary included a $20 million bonus despite the falling stock price. He basically says that the measurements are inadequate and Nielsen's measures are just wrong. And he actually does have more viewers, but they're not capturing it.
I bet if Felipe Dauman was here right now, he'd have the excuse, well, you know, my compensation is actually within the market. And I'm actually being paid less than most of my peers.
Exactly. Look at Zaslav.
Yeah.
He's paid way more than me.
Yeah.
So give me a break. Gosh. So, but anyone with a remote would tell you, bro, Viacom's most popular programs are over a decade old. Under other more creative leadership before Dauman, notably MTV co-founder Tom Freston, Viacom at one time was the home of groundbreaking TV, South Park, Beavis and Butthead, Chappelle's Show, The Daily Show, Daria, The Real World, Had Bangers Ball, SpongeBob SquarePants, and Jackass. I mean, say what you will about whether these shows have artistic merit, but it's certainly better than ridiculousness. And I can't blame Dauman. He was chosen by the board as the antidote to Tom Freston. Dowman is a corporate lawyer. In many ways, he's a mini Sumner. And he got the clear message from the board, like, keep that share price up. So rather than invest in programming that could lead to long-term growth, what does he do? $10 billion, and what do you think?
Share buyback.
Yeah! Buyback.
I thought it was for skateboards for the Fantasy Factory.
Yeah, and skateboards for the Fantasy Factory. He spends $10 billion in share buybacks between 2012 and 2015, an investment that would, get this, lose money as the shares continue to decline. No shit. It doesn't take a Harvard MBA to predict what's going to happen when you prioritize share buybacks over investment programming. And so here are kind of the shows. You remember any of these shows? Jersey Shore. Oh, there you go, Mike, the game.
Oh,
If you want to watch, if you guys are on Paramount Plus,
it was their biggest show ever.
You can see producer Mike in the BET show called The Game.
Season 8 and Season 9.
Season 8 and Season 9. He plays Big Joe.
Papa Joe.
Papa Joe.
Thank you.
Flavor of Love. Hogan
Love
Knows
New
Best.
York.
I Love New York. Yeah, these are good shows.
I mean, the VH1 was really trashy at the time, huh?
At the time, Viacom staffers were even calling out executives about the fact that their shows sucked donkey dick. Jason Hirschhorn, who was the former chief digital officer of MTV Networks, said that several years of cost cutting under Dowman have crippled Viacom's creative culture. I'm tough on Viacom because I grew up there and I have a great affection, but it's unrecognizable to me now. Devoid of strategy, culture, and risk taking, keep burning the furniture for heat.
This is a really interesting case because it's kind of what we saw in the TLC Discovery Zaslav development method, right? Reality TV is really cheap to produce and requires little strategy. But what happens when you prioritize quantity over quality, you become the joke, playing ridiculousness all day long. You know, are these just pains of going through the reality of a reality TV bubble combined with streaming entertainment market disruption? We've now seen this with two media companies. More likely, it's a combination of factors. Too heavily invested in cheap reality TV, no foresight to industry disruption like streaming, and a total lack of originality.
Well, it's also in the case when an independent TV network gets bought out by a bigger company, and then they wipe the slate clean of all the original programming that they're trying to get developed. And then when they bring that original programming back that they're about to do, they get bought into another big conglomerate, and then that same show keeps continually getting pushed down over and over again, and they keep taking your dreams away of hosting a Food Network show. Does that happen to anyone in here 3 times?
I would say another reason why is because these executives are incentivized by share price, and share price doesn't respond right away to new original programming. Like, nobody knew that Beavis and Butthead was going to be a cultural phenomenon, and executives aren't necessarily very good at looking at a show like Beavis and Butthead and saying, I think this is going to be important art for our culture. And I think when you change incentives, when we say, take risks, let's invest in some new creative shows that could change the direction of these companies, but they just will never do it. So there's actually another motivation that Dowman had beyond keeping his job, which was protecting Sumner's estate. Remember, at this point, the depreciated, I use so many synonyms for old, and some of them I forgot about, and so I really like calling him the depreciated Sumner. But he has a bevy of girlfriends to whom he's doling out millions of dollars of Viacom stock. He's still a majority shareholder, but that's at risk if the share price continues to decline and Sumner has to sell more to continue to pay his bills.
I like now that Dowman is moonlighting as an assisted living administrator.
Yeah, seriously.
Looking after Sumner.
It's crazy. I mean, there's more to the story too. Remember when I said that the trust set up by Sumner's first wife directed Sherry Redstone, Sumner's daughter, to be the heir to the Viacom and CBS chairman position via National Amusements? Well, over the intervening years, as Sumner put the interests of his many girlfriends above those of his family, their relationship really strained. And Sumner transferred the inheritance from Sherry to Dowman. So basically, if Dowman could stay in Sumner's good graces until the day he died, he would inherit the kingdom. And Sumner, who is basically bedridden and staring at a TV that switched between Red Sox reruns and the Viacom and CBS stock tickers I'm not making that up. He had his eye on only one metric. And unfortunately for Dauman, his haters were gaining on him. And in early 2016, he receives the email that is every CEO's worst nightmare. An activist investor deck. God, I don't know what I was doing when I was writing this outline. All right, corporate gossip number 7 is, if I were Felipe Dauman, I'd rather hand wash Sumner Redstone's skid marks tidy whiteys than be the subject of this investor deck. We love investor decks. They are corporate gossip catnip. If you're new here, Adam's licking his paws. If you're new here, an activist investor is a fund that takes a position in a company and pushes for change. The idea is whatever change they're pushing for will lead to an increase in stock price and they'll make a return. The change can be for social good, like climate-related initiative, or they might change for a management shakeup. They might push, for example, for what we were just pushing them to do, right? Get rid of Sumner, get rid of the entrenched board, and invest in new and breakthrough programming. And in 2016, that's exactly what Spring Owl Capital did. In a 99-page presentation called How Many Photo Ops Does It Take to Cut a Stock in Half? Bringing Viacom Back. And we're going to go through the best slides now. And we posted all of these to our Substack, but also I think if you go to our link tree on any of our socials, you'll be able to find this deck and then a lot of other decks that we've talked about. So Viacom management has underperformed for years with no accountability. That's the headline of the first slide. They say the Viacom board is too large, too cozy, and too overpaid for underperformance. The activist investor decks are like, I'm trying to think of a Real Housewives comparison. The Lisa Rinna, the Sheena Shea, they will say things that everybody else is thinking, but nobody else has the balls to say. Keep going. Overpaid and lackey board, they have on one slide as the headline. Viacom has the oldest directors on average compared to any of their media peers. The average is 66. I think the average in Congress is even slightly older than that. I love this headline.
This is a great one.
Of this slide. Did MTV get their idea for cribs from the habits of Viacom directors, they ask? They say, Viacom's board pays itself cribs-like compensation. So I love this. Astonishing CEO pay for underperformance. They question, right? Because you have Netflix somewhere on here, which is way lower, and they ask, is Dauman worth 6 times more than Netflix Reed Hastings? Is Dauman worth 30% more than Disney's Bob Iger? They have another call out that says, it's good to be a professional manager who works for Sumner Redstone. Ain't that the truth? Another slide. Forget Weekend at Bernie's for Dauman and Dooley. It's been the last few years at Sumner's. The ideal scenario for Dauman and Dooley is that Sumner lives forever, as he's promised to do, and they keep raking it in. Basically, like, why would they get rid of Sumner? If your boss is completely asleep at the wheel, why would you want a new boss who's actually going to ask you to do things and be accountable for things? This is crazy. This is a picture of Sumner Redstone's signature, and I use that word very lightly because it's basically a line that kind of falls off the page. And they're asking, like, this is a man who is the CEO. Or I'm sorry, this is the man who is the chairman of 2 companies' signatures. This is indicative of having dementia, this signature.
No, he was practicing writing with his feet.
Right. A creatively bankrupt culture. Viacom's CEO message, milk existing hits, do not create new ones, which is what we already talked about. He doesn't understand the content that's on the TV show. He asked in 2015, why the channel needs both The Daily Show and The Colbert Report. And it says, Dauman got his wish because both hosts left last year. So, and this is just a collection of Felipe Dauman with various celebrities, Kim Kardashian, Miley Cyrus.
What we learned from this is that he hates top buttons. This guy loves a low button.
Yeah, this guy's got a look. Jeez,
is that not normal with suits? Are you
that-
not supposed to button them like that? I've
No,
idea.
you're not. You're supposed to button them.
Yeah,
That's why they provide
maybe,
you
like,
buttons.
wear a tie, and also don't make Nicki Minaj look so uncomfortable.
I know, he does make her look uncomfortable. He's with Justin Bieber, and actually, that's the dress. Do you recognize that dress anywhere? That's whoever he's standing with is wearing the same dress Bethany wore on her final confessional for her last season of
really?
Ronin, because I just watched that season. Anyway, okay, so let's move on. I need to put a pin in the story of Felipe Dauman, but we'll return to it later and we'll tie all these loose threads together. But just for now, know that he's holding on to the CEO position for dear life with one little pinky. Kind of like Sumner was hanging on for his life, but it's not looking good for him. All right, corporate gossip number 8. Corporate gossip number 8 is elder abuse ever karmically justified? Here's the thing. On this podcast, we don't often see bad people facing consequences in the regular way. And now we add to that list Sumner Redstone. He never saw the business end of a criminal investigation for his sexual and financial wrongdoing, but some could say his fate provided a bit of consolation for those he's wronged. And the two key villains in his story are his live-in companions, Sydney Holland and Manuela Herzer. I'm not sure where Herzer and Redstone met, but they briefly dated and remained close. And by 2015, she was living in his $28 million mansion, where Sydney Holland, who was actually set up with Sumner by Patty Stanger of Millionaire Matchmaker, Sydney also lived in that house with them. Also occupying the home were a stable of women, including Herzer's personal assistant, whose duties included, quote, ministering to the sexual appetites of a 92-year-old man. Herzer and Holland were living large. In addition to the millions they received in cash and Viacom stock, they were spending millions of dollars on Sumner's credit cards. In 2014, Holland spent $58K at Saks, and Herzer spent $129K at Barney's and $82K at Hermes. All in, Sumner had given the women $150 million over the years.
To quote Kyle in one of the most recent episodes of Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, Donde está Hermes?
The women would have you believe that this is a heartwarming golden bachelor situationship. In a Vanity Fair article in 2015, Holland says she is totally devoted to Sumner. She says, Sumner is a very different and unusual person. You know, I've never noticed his age. He's got this beautiful hair and has the most beautiful skin I've ever seen in my life. Not one wrinkle on his face. We've taken care of each other from day one.
It should be noted that she is also legally blind.
Not a wrinkle. Not a wrinkle.
Not a wrinkle on his face. However, if you go below the chin,
All over his balls.
it's nothing but wrinkle.
But would you be surprised if I told you that court documents would later reveal that Herzer and Holland were operating, dun dun dun, a house of horrors? What Sumner hadn't realized when he invited Herzer and Holland to live with him was he was basically locking himself in a prison and throwing away the keys. According to court documents, Herzer and Holland orchestrated a complex financial abuse and elder abuse scheme, isolating Sumner from his family and manipulating an increasingly feeble man into signing over more and more of his assets to them. Despite the fact that these two women say that they love Sumner and they took great care of him, his nurses, these guys are heroes, specifically Joseph Octaviano and Jeremy Jagiello, who at the time were the only ones who could translate Sumner's speech, which had dissolved at this point into grunts and moans, were appalled by what they saw. He felt they were careless about Sumner's feeding, cutting food into pieces too large for him to swallow comfortably. In August, Octaviano had to perform the Heimlich maneuver after food blocked Sumner's windpipe, and he turned blue. Holland and Herzer ran from the room, Octaviano reported. Other witnesses reported Holland yelling at Sumner while she tended to him. Here's a quote, "I'm not your fucking nurse," they heard her say on one call, and she said she was annoyed that Sumner had urinated in his bed. Another time, he heard her say, "Why are you slobbering all over yourself?" To keep the staff quiet, the two women subjected the staff to lie detector tests and outfitted the mansion with surveillance cameras. They fired anyone who they deemed disloyal. They started systematically isolating Sumner from everyone in his life, including his daughter, Sherry. At the time, Sherry owned 20% of the National Amusements, and she was supposed to take over the company when Sumner died, until he changed the will to leave the company to Dauman. Sherry had become wary of the two women's motives. Their contentious relationship had come to a head over negotiation to buy Sherry out of the company. At this point, Sherry was like, I'm done. I'm done fighting for my father. I'm done fighting for his legacy. I just want to get out. And so she was offered $1 billion in stock to get out of the company and get out of the succession race. And she was ready to sign. But Herzer and Holland intervened And this is where their greed just was insane. But they had Sumner's lawyers add a clause that Sherry could not contest any of the gifts that Sumner was making to the two of them. The day Sumner was to sign the agreement, his nurse alleges he was completely disoriented, asking, "What's happening? Where am I?" Here's an excerpt. Later that afternoon, Octaviano overheard a conversation between Sumner and Holland, with Herzer connected by speakerphone. Holland told Sumner that his family did not love him, and they never even called, Octaviano reported. Holland said Sherry was suing her, which further upset Sumner, and wasn't true, and Herzer added that Sherry was mentally unstable. The abuse was so bad that on January 29th, 2016, Sumner's household staff lodged the first of 2 complaints against Herzer and Holland with the Los Angeles County Adult Protective Services. By the way, if you're keeping track of timelines, Sumner is still the controlling shareholder and executive chairman of Viacom and CBS while this is all going on. Investigators from the Adult Protective Services shows up a few days later, but Holland directed the staff at the house not to let them in. When they were back in LA, Sumner was really freaking out and told the staff, "I'm in trouble. Sydney and Manuela got me in trouble." The investigators returned, but by that point, Holland and Herzer had hired Robert Shapiro.
Bobby.
Remember him?
I remember Bobby.
From the O.J. Simpson trial, to rehearse with Sumner for their interactions. The investigators talked to Sumner, but did not talk to any of the nurses, not even the ones who filed the complaint, nor did they talk to Sumner's family like Sherry. This was the end of the investigation.
If you're a Kardashians fan, that's Uncle Bobby to you.
What the fuck? Where were the LA, I mean, we know that a lot of these social services are not great, but this is a huge miscarriage of safety. Nobody is watching out for this man. So, except for the nurses. So, a few months later, Sumner transferred $10 million to Holland and to Herzer, and afterwards, according to nurses, seemed confused, repeatedly asking the nurses what he'd just done and to whom he'd spoken to at the bank. This is the point in which the whole... Isn't this awful?
Yeah. I was reading this, and you try and weigh what Sumner Redstone has done up into this point of his life and whether he deserves this.
I know. I felt the same way. That's why I was like, is it karmically justified?
But here's the thing. This is a house of horrors. You put it correctly, and it's kind of like death by 1,000. What is it? Death by 1,000 cuts?
Or it's like, yeah, it's death by 1,000 people not doing the right thing when they should have and just ignoring the situation.
Yeah, but this guy, but also he can't. There's nothing he can do. He's just stuck. Yeah.
And this is the point in which the whole Redstone empire is at risk. Herzer and Holland have increasing control over Sumner, and Dowman, CEO of Viacom, is over there sticking his hands under his pits and smelling them. But the Redstones are saved by the literal only people who are effectively advocating for this man, his nurses, 2 in particular. And I hope they paid these guys. By October 2016, Holland is out of the picture. She had been using a good chunk of Sumner's money to pay for an affair with a former actor named George Pilgrim. Herzer actually found out about the affair and made Holland confess. Sumner kicked her out and transferred all of his assets to Herzer. Herzer then tightened her control over Sumner, and he also made her his sole healthcare proxy with Dowman as a backup. So now they've got one evil hag out of the picture, and our brave band of nurses set their targets on Herzer. This is crazy. I mean, this is straight out of a movie. On the morning of October 12th, while Herzer was out doing errands, the team of Jaggiello, Octaviano, and 3 other nurses took their chances. They confronted Sumner and told him everything. They told him about the forged letters. They told him about the hidden cameras, all the lies that the women told Sumner about his family. And Sumner, I guess he was very lucid in that moment, was shocked. Mm-hmm. And he mustered enough mental strength to call his probate lawyers. And he told them he wanted Herzer out of the house and he wanted his money back. And at this point, it's like Sumner is literally being released from prison. His whole family flies to LA. And when Sherry saw him, she gives him a huge hug. She says, "I never thought I'd see you again." Herzer did end up suing the Redstone Family Trust to get her position back as Sumner's healthcare proxy, but the suit failed. But what it did do is spill the top secret tea. And this is when people really find out what's going on with Sumner. in the lawsuit, which again is made public, it says 92-year-old Sumner Redstone, still the highly compensated executive chairman of 2 publicly traded companies, was in fact incapacitated, a living ghost. Armed with that evidence, Wall Street analysts are ready to pounce. A major Viacom shareholder asked at an investor conference if Sumner is no longer fit to lead the board, then he should give up that role. And I told you, we tie all these pieces back together. It was just 1 month after that spring owl slide deck dropped. Then the shareholders sued Viacom, accusing them of breaching their fiduciary duties. So everything is blowing up. Almost second to last piece of corporate gossip. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay, this part I'm just going to sing the Succession theme song. A month later, Sumner officially steps down as chairman of CBS and Viacom. Les Moonves takes over at CBS. The position was initially offered to Sherry, and she deferred to Les, but we'll put that to the side for the moment. We'll revisit that in the next episode. The Viacom board met and voted for Dauman as chair, with the exception of Sherry, who voted no. Shareholders were bummed. This guy had been gutting the business for years, and when the board finally had a chance to oust him, they bitched out. And when Viacom misses earnings and shares hit a 5-year low the next week, Dauman starts to freak out. Everybody hates him, and it's all Sherry Redstone's fault. There's actually a clip here. Did you see this? Of Sherry running out of the Viacom HQ to apologize to Dauman after a particularly nasty earnings call.
Yeah, it's really shocking stuff.
Regina, wait, I didn't mean for that to happen. To find out that everyone hates me, I don't care.
Regina, please.
Regina, stop! Do you know what everyone says about you? They say that you're a homeschooled jungle freak who's a less hot version of me.
Dauman was in jeopardy and more desperate than ever to reclaim control over the Redstone empire. He just had enough time for one final Hail Mary. We're going to sell the Paramount to the Chinese. Dauman got a call from an investment banker about selling a stake in Paramount, which at the time was bleeding money, to a Chinese property conglomerate. Dauman took that information and went to the Viacom directors and said, I'm going to sell a 49% stake in Paramount for $10 billion. Executives were like, bro, what are you smoking? We just lost $100 million last quarter alone. We just sunk millions into Zoolander 2, which was a total flop. No one's going to buy this turd for $10 billion. And there's no way that Sumner would give up even a minority stake in Paramount. This is his crown jewel. But Dauman was like, fuck the business. I want to stay in power. And this is my only life raft. When Sumner found out about the plan, though, he was furious. This once feeble man stood up from his chair. He rushed to the closet, rummaging around for a few seconds before turning around with a pink book covered in magazine clippings. He took a picture of he and Dauman off his vanity and ripped it in half, taking the back of the picture and getting a glue stick and gluing Dauman to a fresh page. Under it, he wrote, "This guy is the nastiest skank bitch I ever met. Do not trust him. He is a fugly slut." And he gave that book to Sherry and he said, finish him. I honestly did not take that much liberty with that story. That's basically what happened. So on May 20th, 2016, Sumner and Sherry oust Dauman from the trust and as CEO. The news was delivered to Dauman in 2016 via fax.
Wow.
Can you imagine watching that slowly print out? Dauman is up against the wall and he does what any CEO does when they're freaking out about their job. He sues to challenge his removal from the trust. He alleges that Sherry Redstone was now exerting undue influence over her father to kick him out. Here's Dauman. We all continue to have great respect and affection for Mr. Redstone, but he is clearly being manipulated by his daughter, Sherry. After years of estrangement, she has inserted herself into his home, taken over his life, and isolated him from anyone not under her control, including longtime business colleagues. On August 16, 2016, Dauman does officially step down from Viacom with, get this, an $85 million golden parachute. In December 2016, Viacom appoints Bob Bakish as CEO. He's still CEO today. He's a good friend of Sherry's, and he had been working at Viacom for 20 years before before that, he was doing management consulting at Booz Allen Hamilton, and he got an MBA from Columbia. So your typical business boy. You ready for corporate gossip number 10?
It's been a cruel Sumner.
It's been a cruel, cruel Sumner. Yeah, I have. Sumner's over. Okay, so we've reached the end of the first part of this story. In part 2, we will meet back up with Sherry as she tries to merge Viacom and CBS and wrestle control of these companies from the skeevy hands of Les Moonves. So what I want to do now is kind of wrap up the loose ends of the characters you met in this episode. We'll find out what happens to everybody. And again, a lot of this comes from unscripted, absolutely incredible reporting. So in 2018, Sydney Holland quietly settled the elder abuse lawsuit. Get this, she was reportedly in talks with Bravo to join Real Housewives of Beverly Hills.
What a treat.
But that fizzled out. She spends her time flipping houses and has recently been romantically linked to a 90-year-old wealthy doctor in San Diego. In 2019, the Redstones also settled with Manuela Herzer for her part in the elder abuse lawsuit. She agreed to pay $3.25 million and agreed to never sue them again. Sumner Redstone passed away on August 11th, 2020. We are going to stop the episode here, and we will cover what's happening now with the merged companies at the end of next week's episode.
I'm ready for CBS.
I know CBS is going to be a good one, but I don't know. I'm again, I think every good corporate gossip episode has us feeling very conflicted over the main characters. I do. He's a creep. Sumner is a creep weirdo. That's a fact, but I don't know that he deserved the elder abuse. But I also think ultimately what this story tells me is that boards, it's crazy we put these boards up on these high pedestals the board of directors, we think they're business soothsayers or something, when most of the time or a lot of the time they're completely asleep at the wheel. And it's kind of disgusting to me, and you're going to be even more disgusted by the board of CBS than you are of the board of Viacom.
Wow.
Yeah. That these guys did nothing.
Promise?
I guarantee you. But these guys did nothing to help this man. Nobody other than the 2 nurses advocated for this man. And like I said, I don't know if the Redstone family paid them, but they should have.
I mean, look, if this guy wasn't such a sexual deviant, he might not have put himself in this situation, right?
No, but that's the question. That's the moral question is this deserved? I don't know.
I don't think that it's deserved, but to a certain extent, it is self-fulfilling.
It's karmic. It's
right?
karmic.
His nurses cared for him. It sounded like they loved him. They were very caring for him, and it seems like to a certain degree they had an excellent relationship.
But they're also only there for that part of it. They're there to be an elder care. They don't know or care about what happened before. They're there to take care of this feeble old man. That's all they see him as.
And they
did their duty.
They did their duty. I love when the Corporate Gossip podcast has these heroes that emerge, and they were great nurses.
Let's leave it there.
Let's leave it there. Let's leave it on a positive note, thanking the nurses. All right, guys, we'll be back next week with CBS. Holy shit. You thought that Sumner was messy? Just wait until you meet who I like to call Messy Les Moonves.
Messy Leslie.
You like that? Mm-hmm. So, okay. If you want to read Unscripted, the book we read for this podcast episode and the next one, or any of the articles that we read this week, you can find those links in our show notes, or you can go to the Substack where we have all the pictures from this episode and a bunch more links. If you want to support the podcast, I actually just recently added I don't know if you saw this, but I recently added a fund for our research trip to Margaritaville, because we're considering doing a Margaritaville episode next week, and it's already been partially funded.
Yeah, that's Times Square prices, so those drinks aren't free.
Right. And not next week. Sorry, next season is what I meant to say. So if you want to fund our trip to Margaritaville, you can do that, or any support that you give to our podcast is helpful. The most helpful support you can do, and this doesn't cost you $1, is just giving us a rate and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That's always helpful. You can send us an email with any notes. We love to get show ideas from our emails. That's Becca@nighttoast.com or Adam@nighttoast.com. You can follow us at Corporate Gossip on TikTok and on Instagram. And I think that's it. Thank you, Adam. And thank you, producer Mike. See you guys next week.